You wake up tomorrow morning and immediately begin a sequence of actions. You check your phone before your feet touch the ground. You scroll for exactly 3 to 5 minutes, not by conscious decision, but by habit. You get out of bed, move to the bathroom, brush your teeth in the same pattern you always do. Right side first, then left, then front. You splash water on your face. You look in the mirror and make a micro-judgment about your appearance that will color your mood for the next hour. You get dressed, choosing from a limited set of acceptable outfits based on invisible rules you've internalized. You make coffee or tea in the exact same sequence. You check social media while waiting. You prepare for the day ahead using a mental checklist that's burned so deep into your brain you can execute it on complete autopilot. None of this was a conscious choice. None of it. Every single action, every micro decision, every behavioral response that felt spontaneous was actually the output of deep neurological systems that evolved over millions of years, systems that are so automatic, so completely beneath your conscious awareness that you genuinely believe you're making free choices. But you're not. You're executing programs. You're a biological machine running scripts that were written by evolution, by learning, by social conditioning, and by invisible psychological forces that operate outside your awareness. And here's what's even more unsettling. You're not alone. Every single person you interact with today is running the same kinds of scripts. Your boss is executing programs. Your partner is executing programs. Your children are executing programs. The stranger who cut you off in traffic was executing a program. The person who ignored your message was executing a program. Everyone, including you, is operating in a state of profound unconsciousness about why they're actually doing what they're doing. But what if that changed? What if, instead of moving through your day on complete autopilot, you could see what's actually happening? What if you could recognize the scripts, understand the mechanisms, and consciously choose whether to run those programs or to override them? What if you could see other people with that same clarity, recognizing what's driving their behavior, understanding their motivations at a depth they themselves don't understand? That's what tonight is about. Over the next 90 minutes, you're going to discover 25 things you do every single day without understanding why. Some of them are small micro behaviors, so insignificant you've never paid conscious attention to them. Some of them are massive fundamental patterns that shape your entire life, your relationships, your career, and your sense of self. But every single one of them is running below your conscious awareness right now. Every single one has shaped your past and will shape your future unless you become aware of it and make a deliberate choice. The mechanism is always the same. Your brain operates at multiple levels simultaneously. Your conscious mind can process about 40 to 50 pieces of information per second. Meanwhile, your brain is receiving and processing approximately 11 million pieces of information per second. This means that 99.99999 of what your brain is doing is happening outside your conscious awareness. You are not the conscious, deliberate, free-willed agent you believe yourself to be. You are a complex biological system running on automatic. This isn't pessimism. This isn't saying that free will doesn't exist. This is neuroscience. This is psychology. This is the demonstrated research-backed truth about how human brains actually work. And understanding this, really understanding it, changes everything. When you understand why you're checking your phone compulsively, you can make different choices about technology use. When you understand why you're drawn to certain people and repelled by others, you can make more conscious choices about relationships. When you understand why you believe the things you believe and why you resist information that contradicts your beliefs, you can become a more flexible, more intelligent thinker. When you understand why you make the decisions you make, you can start making better decisions. Understanding these 25 daily patterns is the first step toward genuine freedom. It's the first step toward actually choosing your life, rather than simply executing programs that were installed in your brain before you had any say in the matter. So pay attention over the next 90 minutes. Each section reveals another layer. Each pattern exposes another script. And by the end, you'll have a map of your own neurological machinery. You'll understand yourself at a depth most people never achieve. And when you encounter other people, when you interact with the people in your life, you'll see them differently too. You'll understand what's actually driving them. You'll see through their surface behavior to the underlying mechanisms. You'll possess a kind of psychological X-ray vision that most people never develop. The journey from blindness to sight always feels disorienting at first, but once you see, you can't unsee. And really seeing is the only path to genuine change. Let's begin. Thing 1. The autopilot morning ritual. Think about your morning routine, not the one you think you do, the one you actually do. You wake up. Maybe you have an alarm. Maybe you naturally wake at the same time every day. What happens next? If you're like most people, the very first thing you do is reach for your phone. You don't consciously decide to do this. Your arm doesn't move because your prefrontal cortex sent a signal saying, "Let's check notifications." Your arm moves because a neural pattern, a habit, has been so thoroughly encoded in your brain that it activates automatically the moment consciousness returns. Neuroscientists call this the default mode network, or DMN. It's a system of interconnected brain regions that activates when you're not focused on external tasks. It's your brain's autopilot. And when you first wake up, when your prefrontal cortex is still coming online, when the rational conscious part of your brain is still foggy with sleep, the DMN is king. It runs your behavior, it executes the programs. So you check your phone, you scroll for 3 to 5 minutes. This duration is not random. It's encoded in your neurological system. You've repeated this behavior so many times that your brain has learned the expected duration. Your dopamine system has learned to anticipate notifications in that 3 to 5 minute window. When you reach that time, a signal fires in your basal ganglia, the ancient part of your brain that handles habits, and your hand naturally puts the phone down. Or it doesn't, depending on what your brain found. Then what? You get out of bed. Maybe you stumble to the bathroom. Maybe you get a glass of water first. But the sequence is remarkably consistent from day to day. Why? Because consistency requires less energy. Consistency requires less conscious processing power. Your brain is an energy efficiency machine. It evolved to conserve energy. Because in ancestral environments, energy conservation meant survival. You didn't know when your next meal was coming, so your brain learned to minimize energy expenditure on non-essential tasks. Decision-making is energy expensive, so your brain avoids decisions whenever possible. It creates habits, automatic sequences that require minimal energy. You brush your teeth, left side or right side first, always the same. Why? You don't know. You have no memory of deciding on that pattern, but ask 100 people and you'll get about 50-50 left versus right first. The point is that the pattern is locked in. The neural pathway is so deeply grooved that your toothbrush moves in the same pattern every single day without conscious instruction. This is the basal ganglia at work, the ancient brain structure that handles procedural memory and habit execution. You look in the mirror. This is where conscious processing begins to activate. You make a judgment about your appearance. That judgment is filtered through multiple layers of bias, comparison, and internal narrative. Are you comparing yourself to how you looked yesterday? Are you comparing yourself to an internalized ideal? Are you comparing yourself to celebrities or influencers you saw on social media before bed? Your brain is running rapid-fire comparisons and generating a judgment that feels like objective truth, but is actually loaded with bias, context, and emotional coloring. This judgment, this single micro-decision made in half a second while you're still half asleep, will color your emotional state for the next hour. If the judgment is negative, you feel like you look tired, bloated, or otherwise unattractive. a cascade of neural activity is triggered. Your insula, the brain region involved in self-awareness and social monitoring, activates. Your amygdala, the threat detection center, fires up. A subtle cortisol spike occurs. You feel slightly worse. This subtle mood shift is completely unconscious, but it influences everything you do next. You get dressed. This is where unconscious rules become visible if you pay attention. You don't try on 50 outfits. You select from a small, pre-approved set of combinations that feel acceptable for the day ahead. Why do these clothes feel acceptable? Because they are consistent with an internalized identity. Your brain has learned through repeated social feedback, through comparison with others, through cultural messaging, what counts as acceptable for someone like you in your social position. A banker wears a suit. A creative wears something more casual. A young person wears current styles. An older person wears classic styles. These aren't conscious rules. They're so deeply encoded that they feel natural, inevitable, like objective truth. But they're actually cultural programs, instructions that have been installed in your brain through repeated exposure and social feedback. You make your coffee or tea. The sequence is identical every time. Grounds in, water in, wait for the brew, grab your mug, add cream or don't, add sugar or don't. Every step is automated. Why? Because you've done it thousands of times. The neural pattern is so deeply encoded that you could do it while completely asleep. In fact, studies show that people with certain forms of dementia can still make their habitual morning beverage long after they've lost the ability to make conscious decisions. You check social media while waiting. This is where the reward system kicks in. You're not consciously deciding to check social media because you think it's a good use of your time. You're checking because your ventral striatum, the part of your brain responsible for reward processing, has learned to anticipate dopamine hits from notifications, messages, and social feedback. Each check creates a small variable reward. Sometimes there's a notification waiting, dopamine spike. Sometimes there isn't, disappointment, but the uncertainty itself is rewarding. This is the same reward schedule that makes slot machines so addictive. And your social media app was deliberately designed to exploit this neurological vulnerability. You prepare for the day ahead. Your mental checklist runs automatically. Do I have my keys, my wallet, my phone, my calendar? These checks aren't conscious deliberation. They're a mental ritual that's been burned into your procedural memory. You execute the checklist so automatically that you sometimes worry, did I lock the door? Not because you have reason to believe you didn't, but because the action was so automatic that your conscious mind didn't register it happening. By the time you've been awake for 30 minutes, you've made approximately 0 conscious decisions. You've executed a program, a deeply grooved neural sequence that runs with almost complete automaticity. And here's the thing. This program shapes your entire day. Your mood set by that split-second mirror judgment influences how you interact with people, what you notice, how you interpret ambiguous situations. Your energy level, influenced by notifications and social media dopamine hits, influences your productivity and your emotional resilience. Your sense of preparedness, influenced by whether you successfully executed your mental checklist, influences your confidence and stress levels. This is why awareness of your autopilot rituals matters. It's not because there's anything inherently wrong with routines. Routines are efficient. They free up mental energy for things that matter. But the problem is that your autopilot rituals are currently running scripts that were installed without your permission, by forces you didn't choose, in service of goals that might not be your goals. Your morning phone check was installed by years of social conditioning around connectivity and FOMO. Your coffee ritual was installed by caffeine dependency and cultural programming. Your clothing choices were installed by social conditioning around appearance and status. Your social media check was deliberately installed by engineers and designers who were paid to make their apps as addictive as possible. So the first step toward freedom is awareness. You need to see your autopilot rituals clearly. You need to recognize that they're patterns, not inevitable truths. Once you see them, you have a choice. You can continue running the same programs if you genuinely want to. But you can also experiment. What if you didn't check your phone immediately upon waking? What if you waited 20 minutes? What would happen? Would the world explode? Or would you simply have 20 minutes of freedom from the dopamine treadmill? Awareness is the first step. And awareness of your morning ritual, the sequence of actions that sets the tone for your entire day, is foundational to everything else. Thing 2. Micro decisions without awareness. Your day is not made up of big decisions. It's made up of thousands of micro decisions, tiny choices made so automatically that you barely register they're happening. Most of these micro decisions feel like they're based on rational analysis, but they're actually driven by unconscious heuristics, biases, and emotional reactions that fire in milliseconds before your conscious mind even registers what's happening. Consider what happens when you walk into your workplace. You see colleagues. Your brain instantly categorizes them: friend, neutral, threat. This categorization happens in approximately 200 milliseconds. Your conscious mind hasn't even finished registering that they exist, and your brain has already made a judgment about their status relative to you and generated an appropriate behavioral response. If the colleague is someone you like, friend category, your face relaxes slightly, your mirror neurons activate, and your verbal behavior automatically shifts toward warmth and engagement. You don't consciously decide to be friendlier. Your brain automatically runs the friend behavioral program. The neural pathways associated with that person fire, and the associated behavior follows automatically. If the colleague is someone you're neutral about, your behavior is calibrated to efficiency. You might make minimal eye contact, keep your response brief, and move on. Again, this is automatic. Your brain has learned through repeated exposure and social feedback what counts as appropriate interaction with this person at this social distance, and it executes that program. If the colleague is someone you dislike or feel threatened by, threat category, your behavior shifts again. You might avoid eye contact, you might physically move away, or you might engage in defensive posturing. The amygdala, your threat detection center, has fired, and behavior emerges automatically in response. All of this happens in seconds. Your conscious mind might not even register the interaction, but you've made a series of micro-decisions that will influence the entire tone of your day and the trajectory of that relationship. Then you sit at your desk. Micro-decisions cascade. Do you start on the most important task, or do you check email first? Most people check email first, not because they've consciously decided that email is more important than their primary work, but because the reward pathway associated with checking messages is more immediately salient than the abstract reward of working on their primary task. Your brain prefers immediate rewards to delayed rewards. This is called temporal discounting, and it's a fundamental feature of human neurology. So you check email. As you read each message, your brain makes rapid micro-decisions about which emails deserve attention, which can be ignored, and which demand an immediate response. But these decisions aren't based on rational analysis of which emails are actually most important. They're based on threat detection. An email from your boss triggers different neural activity than an email from a friend. An email with a subject line containing a threat word, urgent, problem, failed, triggers different neural activity than a neutral subject line. Your brain is running a threat detection algorithm, and your micro-decisions about which emails to address first are determined by which threats loom largest in your amygdala. This is why people often respond to the least important but most emotionally triggering emails first, rather than responding to the most important emails. You decide what to eat for lunch. This should be a conscious decision based on nutritional value, taste preference, and health goals. But studies show that micro-decisions about food are heavily influenced by unconscious factors. What you see first, visual priming, what you saw other people eating, social proof, how the food is labeled, framing, and subtle emotional associations with the food that you're not aware you have. If the salad is labeled fresh and healthy and the pizza is labeled delicious, you're more likely to choose the salad not because it's actually healthier, it might not be, but because the labeling has primed different associations. Your unconscious associative network has activated healthy in association with the salad, and this activation influences your choice automatically. You have a conversation with someone. You make micro decisions about what to say, how to say it, and what not to say. But these decisions are heavily influenced by unconscious factors, mirroring of their body language and speech patterns, which happens automatically through mirror neurons, priming based on recent experiences. If you just saw an ad about a product, you're more likely to mention that product, and emotional contagion. If the person you're talking to is anxious, you'll automatically become more anxious too, and this will influence your behavior. You wear a specific outfit. On the surface, you might believe you chose it based on practical considerations. It's cold today, so I'll wear a sweater. But the actual micro-decision was influenced by unconscious factors. Mood. People in good moods choose brighter colors. People in bad moods choose darker colors. Social context. You wear different things depending on who you'll be seeing. And internalized identity. You wear things consistent with how you see yourself or how you want others to see you. You make a judgment about someone's trustworthiness. This judgment should be based on careful evaluation of their past behavior and demonstrated character. But research shows that micro-decisions about trustworthiness are heavily influenced by unconscious factors. Physical attractiveness. Attractive people are judged as more trustworthy. Facial symmetry. Symmetrical faces are judged as more trustworthy. And even resemblance to people you've previously trusted. People who look like someone you trust are judged as more trustworthy, even though resemblance has nothing to do with actual trustworthiness. You spend your money. You might think you spend money based on rational evaluation of whether you need something and whether you can afford it. But neuroscience research shows that spending decisions are heavily influenced by unconscious factors. The price anchor. The first price you see influences how you evaluate all subsequent prices. Scarcity framing. Only 3 left in stock triggers a buying impulse. An emotional state. People spend more money when they're sad or anxious. You respond to an argument with someone you care about. The conversation becomes heated. You make a micro-decision about what to say next, but this decision is heavily influenced by the threat system that's been activated by the conflict. Your amygdala is firing, your cortisol is elevated, your prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain responsible for rational analysis and impulse control, is partially offline. So your micro-decision is not based on rational analysis of what would actually improve the situation. It's based on threat response and emotion regulation. You might say something aggressive, fight response, something defensive, freeze response, or something that shuts down the conversation, flight response. None of these micro-decisions felt like they were happening automatically. They all felt like conscious choices. But that's the nature of automatic processes. They feel like conscious choices because your conscious mind is provided with a rationalization after the fact. Your brain makes the decision, and then your conscious mind generates a post hoc explanation that feels like deliberation, but is actually just rationalization. This is why understanding micro-decisions is so important. These tiny automatic choices cascade throughout your day. They determine what emails you respond to, who you connect with, how you spend your money, what you eat, and how you interact with the people in your life. And they're determined by neural systems that evolved to solve problems in ancestral environments, not by conscious analysis of what's actually in your best interest. The first step toward taking control of your micro-decisions is becoming aware that they're happening. You can't change what you don't notice, so tomorrow pay attention to your micro-decisions. Notice which emails you respond to first, and ask yourself if they're actually most important or just most emotionally triggering. Notice what you choose to eat and ask yourself if it's based on actual preference or unconscious priming. Notice which people you naturally gravitate toward and ask yourself if it's based on their actual character or unconscious biases. Notice your spending decisions and ask yourself if they're based on actual need or unconscious emotional states. Once you notice the patterns, you have power. You can choose to override automatic responses. You can pause before responding to an emotionally triggering email and ask, is this actually the most important thing I need to address? You can look at the menu without reading the labels and ask yourself what you actually want to eat. You can reflect on your judgments about people and ask whether you're responding to their actual character or to unconscious biases. You can monitor your spending and ask whether you're buying things you actually need or using shopping to regulate emotion. Awareness is the first step. And awareness of your micro decisions, the thousands of tiny automatic choices that actually determine how you spend your time in your life, is foundational to everything else. Thing 3. Subconscious mirroring. When you're in a conversation with someone, something remarkable is happening in your brain that you're completely unaware of. Your brain is automatically copying the other person's body language, their facial expressions, their gestures, their speech patterns, even their emotional state. This process is called mirroring, and it happens automatically through the activation of mirror neurons, a system of brain cells that fire both when you perform an action and when you observe someone else performing it. Mirroring happens so automatically, so beneath your conscious awareness, that most people go through their entire lives without recognizing that it's happening. But it's one of the most powerful forces shaping your relationships, your likability, and your social influence. Here's what happens. You're talking to someone. Their head tilts slightly to the left. Within milliseconds, before your conscious mind has even registered their head tilt, your mirror neuron system has fired. Neural patterns in your premotor cortex and superior temporal sulcus brain regions involved in action perception activate in response to their head tilt. And your head, without conscious instruction, begins to tilt slightly to the left as well. They speak a bit faster than usual. Your mirror neuron system registers this. Your speech rate accelerates without conscious decision. They use a particular phrase or vocabulary word. Your associative networks activate. Moments later, you find yourself using similar vocabulary or phrasing. Their facial expression shifts. They might not even realize they're making the expression. But your facial muscles automatically contract in mimicry. If they're nervous, micro-expressions of anxiety cross their face. Your mirror neurons activate. Your facial muscles contract. And because facial expressions and emotional states are bidirectionally linked, it's not just that emotions create expressions, expressions create emotions. When your facial muscles contract in mimicry of their anxiety expression, your brain interprets these facial movements as signals of anxiety. Your amygdala activates slightly. You feel slightly more anxious too. Their emotional state has been transferred to you through the mirror neuron system. This is happening in every conversation you have. Right now, as you're listening to this script, if you're watching a video, your mirror neuron system is partially mirroring the speaker. If the speaker seems calm, you become calmer. If the speaker seems agitated, you become more agitated. If the speaker seems trustworthy, your mirror neurons activate, and you become more likely to trust them. If the speaker seems untrustworthy, your mirror neuron system partially activates a defensive response, and you become more skeptical. The implications are profound. Your emotional state, your body language, your speech patterns, your trustworthiness judgments, all of these are being continuously influenced by the people around you without your conscious awareness. And more importantly, for understanding how other people work, you're unconsciously mirroring them into trust and rapport. In fact, research on rapport shows that the strength of rapport between two people correlates directly with the amount of mirroring happening between them. When two people are getting along well, they're mirroring each other more. When two people are in conflict, they're mirroring each other less. The person who starts mirroring more often is the person whose opinion starts to matter more to the other person. This is why skilled negotiators, salespeople, and manipulators deliberately mirror the people they're trying to influence. They mirror the other person's body language, speech rate, and breathing patterns. And because the mirror neuron system is partially wired into the reward pathways, when the other person sees themselves being mirrored, it feels good. It creates a sense of rapport. It makes the other person feel like you get them. In relationships, couples who are in love mirror each other more than couples in conflict or neutral relationships. Parents and children who have secure attachments mirror each other more. In group settings, people who mirror each other more often become leaders and are perceived as more competent and likable. But here's the darker side of mirroring. Because mirroring happens automatically, because it happens beneath conscious awareness, it can be used to manipulate. If someone deliberately mirrors you, they can trigger the rapport response without your conscious awareness. They can make you feel like you have more in common with them than you actually do. They can make you trust them more than you should. This is why sales training often includes instruction on mirroring techniques. This is why therapists are trained to be aware of mirroring and to use it consciously to build rapport with clients. And beyond interpersonal mirroring, there's a larger phenomenon: cultural mirroring. Your entire social group is engaged in mutual mirroring. Your facial expressions, your speech patterns, your values, your beliefs, all of these are partially shaped by mirroring the people around you. You look to other people for cues about how to behave in ambiguous situations. You unconsciously adopt the mannerisms and speech patterns of your peer group. You mirror the values of your community. This is why people in different regions have different accents, even though they're not consciously trying to sound different. It's why teenagers suddenly start dressing like their peers, even though they're not consciously deciding to match the group's fashion. It's why people in the same community tend to share political views, religious beliefs, and values. They're all engaged in mutual mirroring. The real shock is this: you might believe your values, your beliefs, and your personality are authentically yours, but a significant portion of them are the result of unconscious mirroring of the people and communities you've been embedded in. You're not as original as you believe. You're not as independent as you believe. You're partially a mirror of everyone around you. And once you see this, you can never unsee it. When you're in a conversation with someone, you'll start noticing the mirroring. You'll notice yourself tilting your head the way they tilted theirs. You'll notice your speech rate shifting to match theirs. You'll notice your emotional state shifting to mirror their emotional state. And you'll realize something uncomfortable. You're not as in control of your own behavior as you believed. But here's the liberating part. Once you become aware of mirroring, you can make conscious choices about whether to mirror. If someone is anxious and you mirror their anxiety, you become more anxious. But what if you deliberately don't mirror? What if you maintain a calm posture and calm facial expression even though they're nervous? Does their anxiety transfer to you? Not as strongly. Your deliberate choice to maintain your own state can buffer you from emotional contagion. Similarly, you can deliberately mirror people in ways that serve your relationships. If you want to build rapport with someone, you can deliberately mirror their positive traits while avoiding mirroring their negative ones. You can mirror their enthusiasm without mirroring their anxiety. You can mirror their warmth without mirroring their aggression. And in understanding other people, recognizing mirroring allows you to see how much of their behavior is actually their authentic preference versus how much is mirroring the expectations and norms of their social environment. Someone might say they value competition and independence, but you observe them constantly mirroring the values of their peer group. This suggests that their stated values might not be authentically theirs, but rather mirrored from their social context. So pay attention to mirroring today. Notice how you're automatically copying people around you. Notice how they're automatically copying you. Notice how emotional states are transferred through the mirror neuron system. Once you see it clearly, you'll understand something fundamental about how human social behavior actually works. We are creatures of imitation and emotional contagion. We are social mimics, and that mirroring is happening in every single interaction, whether we're aware of it or not. Thing 4. Habit loop activation. Throughout your day, you're activating and executing habit loops, neurological patterns that have been so thoroughly grooved into your brain that they run with almost complete automaticity. Charles Duhigg's research on habits identified a 3-part loop: cue, routine, reward. Understanding this loop is crucial to understanding why you do the things you do every single day without conscious awareness. The cue is the trigger. It's an environmental or emotional signal that activates a habit loop. The cue might be an external trigger. You see a red dress and it reminds you of someone, activating an emotional memory. You smell coffee and it activates the morning ritual routine. You hear your phone notification sound and it activates the phone checking routine. Or the cue might be an internal trigger. You feel anxious and it triggers the anxiety-soothing habit. Maybe that's stress eating, or social media checking, or calling a friend. The routine is the behavior itself. It's the automated sequence that runs after the cue triggers it. The routine is executed by the basal ganglia, a primitive part of your brain that handles procedural memory and automatic behaviors. Once a routine has been repeated enough times, the neural pathways associated with it become so deeply grooved that the routine can run with almost no energy expenditure. In fact, when a routine is highly automated, your prefrontal cortex, conscious reasoning center, actually disengages. This is why you can drive home from work and have no conscious memory of the drive. Your basal ganglia is running the driving routine while your prefrontal cortex is checked out. The reward is the neurochemical reinforcement that strengthens the habit loop. When you complete the routine, your brain releases dopamine, the motivation and reward neurotransmitter, in the striatum, part of the basal ganglia. This dopamine hit strengthens the association between the cue and the routine. The more rewarding the routine, the stronger the habit becomes. So let's trace a concrete habit loop. Your cue is arriving at your desk in the morning. Your routine is checking email and social media for 10 minutes. Your reward is the dopamine hit from seeing notifications and engaging with content. This loop has been repeated hundreds or thousands of times. The neural pathway is deeply grooved. The moment you sit at your desk, the cue automatically triggers the routine. Your conscious mind might not even notice that the routine is running. You find yourself checking email and social media before you've consciously decided to do so. Here's the problem. That routine doesn't necessarily serve your goals. You might consciously want to spend your morning working on your most important project, but the habit loop is more powerful than your conscious intention. Your basal ganglia has learned that the desk cue leads to email routine, which leads to dopamine reward. That's a deeply grooved pathway. Your prefrontal cortex, conscious reasoning, is trying to tell you to do something else, but the basal ganglia is more powerful. The automatic pathway wins. Throughout your day, you're executing dozens of these habit loops. You feel stressed, cue, and you check social media, routine, and you get a dopamine hit, reward. You're bored, cue, and you open your email. Routine, and you get novelty-seeking reward, reward. You're in a particular location, cue, and you perform the associated behavioral routine, routine, and you get the associated reward, reward. Most of these habit loops were encoded without conscious intention. You didn't decide to make feeling stressed trigger social media checking. But after you checked social media a few times when stressed and got a dopamine hit each time, your brain made the association. The neural pathway was strengthened. And now the behavior runs automatically. This is what Duhigg calls the power of habit. It's not that habits are bad, in fact. Habits are incredibly useful. Habits free up conscious processing resources by automating routine behaviors. The problem is that your current habit loops are often serving goals that aren't actually your goals. They're serving the goals of the platforms, social media, that have deliberately designed their systems to create reward loops. They're serving the goals of fast food companies that have engineered their products to trigger reward loops. They're serving the goals of various addictive behaviors. The mechanism is always the same. Cue triggers, routine triggers, reward triggers, dopamine, spike triggers, habit strengthening. Repeat this enough times and the behavior becomes automatic. You no longer need conscious intention. The behavior runs. But here's the crucial insight. The routine can be swapped. The cue is the same, but you can change what routine fires in response to it. If you feel stressed, cue, and instead of checking social media, old routine, you take a 5-minute walk, new routine, you get a different reward. The walk might make you feel better, which provides a different kind of reward than the dopamine hit from social media. If you repeat this new routine enough times, the neural pathway strengthens. Eventually, the new routine becomes automatic. This is why habit change is possible, but why it's also difficult. You can't eliminate a habit, but you can replace it. You need to keep the same cue and the same reward, but insert a new routine in between. Because the new routine hasn't been practiced as much, it requires conscious effort at first. Your prefrontal cortex needs to actively override the automatic basal ganglia pathway. But with repetition, the new pathway becomes grooved. The new routine becomes automatic. Throughout your day, pay attention to your habit loops. Notice the cues. Notice the routines that automatically activate. Notice the rewards you're getting. Ask yourself, is this routine actually serving my goals? If the answer is no, what would an alternative routine look like? What cue could I use? What reward could I get from a different routine? For example, if you notice that arriving home, cue, triggers beer drinking, routine, triggers relaxation reward, you might ask, could I use the same cue, arriving home, to trigger exercise, new routine, which also provides relaxation reward? The cue stays the same. The reward is similar, but the routine changes. With repetition, the new habit loop becomes automatic. The goal isn't to live in a state of constant conscious control that would be exhausting. The goal is to consciously choose which habit loops to encode. Because once they're encoded, they run automatically. And you want your automatic systems to be running routines that actually serve your goals, not routines that serve someone else's goals. So pay attention today to your habit loops. See the cues, notice the routines, feel the rewards, and ask yourself, is this actually what I want my brain to do automatically? Thing 5. Contextual priming. Before you even make a conscious decision about something, your brain has already been primed. Contextual priming is the phenomenon where exposure to one stimulus, a word, an image, a concept, a smell, influences your response to a completely unrelated stimulus. And the terrifying part is that this influence happens completely outside your awareness. You have no idea you're being influenced. Here's an example. Researchers presented people with word puzzles. Half the group was given puzzles containing words related to old age, wrinkles, elderly, gray, retired, ancient. The other half was given control puzzles with neutral words. After solving the puzzles, both groups were asked to walk from the laboratory to a nearby room to complete the next task. Here's what happened. The group that had been primed with old age words walked significantly more slowly than the control group, not because they consciously decided to walk slower, not because walking slower made logical sense, simply because their brains had been primed with concepts related to aging, and these concepts activated neural networks associated with age-related behaviors. Without any conscious awareness, their motor behavior was influenced. This is just one of hundreds of priming studies showing that your behavior is constantly being shaped by subtle environmental cues that you're completely unaware of. Here's another. Researchers primed people with concepts related to money. Some participants were shown images of money, others were asked to count money. A control group was shown and counted cut paper. Then all groups were given tasks where they could work collaboratively or competitively with another person. Result: the group that had been primed with money concepts chose competitive behaviors significantly more often than the control group. They were less cooperative. They were more selfish. And they had no idea the money priming had influenced their behavior. They believed their behavioral choice was based on their own values and preferences. But it wasn't. It was primed. Your entire day is a sequence of priming events. The images you see on your social media feed before you go to work prime your perception of what's normal and what's valuable. A news story about crime primes you to notice danger and threats throughout your day. An image of someone highly attractive primes you to judge normal people more harshly, by contrast. A conversation about money primes you to be more selfish. A conversation about compassion primes you to be more generous. A conversation about mortality primes you to value relationships more. A conversation about climate change primes you to notice environmental issues. And here's the real problem. People who understand priming can deliberately prime you to think, feel, and behave in ways that serve their goals, not your goals. Retailers understand priming. Fast food restaurants pipe the smell of fries and burgers into the air outside their buildings, not just inside. Why? Because the smell primes hunger. When you smell those scents, your brain activates appetite-related neural networks. You're more likely to enter the restaurant. You're more likely to order food. You're more likely to order more food than you intended. The retailer has primed you without your conscious awareness. Advertisers understand priming. They show you images of attractive people using their product, not because the product actually makes you attractive, but because the image primes associations between the product and attractiveness. Your brain learns the association at an unconscious level. Later, when you see the product, those attractive associations are automatically activated. You're more likely to buy the product, not because you've consciously reasoned that it will make you attractive, but because the priming has made the association automatic. Politicians understand priming. They use particular words and images in their campaigns to prime particular associations and emotions. A candidate might repeatedly use language that primes nationalism or security concerns, not because the words are logical arguments, but because the priming works directly on your emotional systems. Your amygdala responds to the priming before your prefrontal cortex has even engaged conscious reasoning. Tech companies understand priming. The color red primes urgency. Numbers prime competitive thinking. Scarcity language primes fear of missing out. The design of every app and website is deliberately engineered to prime particular mental states and behaviors, and you're completely unaware of it. Here's what makes it worse. Once you're primed, you're biased to interpret subsequent information in ways consistent with the priming. If you've been primed with words related to intelligence, you'll be more likely to interpret ambiguous behavior as intelligent. If you've been primed with words related to hostility, you'll be more likely to interpret ambiguous behavior as hostile. The priming creates a lens through which you perceive reality. So right now, in this moment, your perception is being shaped by priming. The fact that you're listening to a script about psychology and hidden influences is priming you to notice hidden influences everywhere. Notice that I'm doing right now, I'm priming you to be more aware of priming. Is my intention to help you or to make you more susceptible to my messaging? You can't know for sure. The first step toward resistance is awareness. Throughout your day, pay attention to what you've been exposed to. What images have you seen? What words have you heard? What concepts have been activated? Notice how these might be influencing your current thinking, feeling, and behavior. If you've been consuming social media full of successful people, you might be primed toward envy, comparison, and inadequacy. If you've been consuming news full of danger and violence, you might be primed toward fear and threat vigilance. If you've been exposed to images of attractive people, you might be primed to be more critical of normal appearances. The goal is not to eliminate priming. That's impossible. It's a fundamental feature of how brains work. The goal is to become aware of it. Because once you're aware, you can make conscious choices about what to expose yourself to. You can deliberately avoid priming that doesn't serve you. And you can deliberately choose priming that does. If you want to feel more generous, you might deliberately expose yourself to images and stories about compassion and charity. If you want to be more creative, you might deliberately expose yourself to art and novel ideas. If you want to be more focused on health, you might deliberately remove social media feeds that are constantly priming unhealthy food images. Your environment is full of deliberate priming engineered by people who want to influence your behavior. Some of this is benign. Some of it is definitely not. The first step toward genuine agency is noticing the priming and then making conscious choices about your exposure. Thing 6. Social proof. Checking. You walk into a new restaurant. It's packed with people. You assume it must be good, otherwise why would so many people be there? You see a post on social media with 50,000 likes. You assume it must be worth your attention, otherwise why would so many people have liked it? You hear that a particular product is a bestseller. You assume it must be high quality, otherwise why would so many people be buying it? This is social proof in action. Social proof is the tendency to look at what others are doing and assume that if many people are doing something, it must be right. It's a powerful heuristic that usually works well in ancestral environments. What many people in your community were doing was usually a reliable guide to what was actually good and safe. But in modern environments, social proof can be completely manipulated and distorted. Throughout your day, you're constantly checking social proof and allowing it to influence your decisions. But you're doing this without conscious awareness. You're not consciously thinking, many people are doing this, therefore I should do it. Instead, your brain is automatically registering how many people are doing something, and that registration is automatically influencing your behavior. This is mediated by your dorsolateral prefrontal cortex and the anterior insula brain regions involved in monitoring social norms and conformity. When you perceive that many people are behaving a certain way, these regions activate, and your behavior automatically shifts toward conformity with the perceived norm. But here's the thing. Social proof is remarkably easy to fake. Businesses can artificially inflate their follower counts or review ratings. Movements can create the illusion of widespread support through coordinated action of small numbers of people. News outlets can cherry-pick stories to make certain viewpoints seem more widespread than they actually are. Politicians can use paid supporters to create the illusion of grassroots support. And social media has weaponized social proof. Every platform displays like counts, view counts, follower counts, all visible signals of social approval. The more visible the approval signal, the more people want to engage with the content, simply because many people have engaged with it. This creates a feedback loop where content that happens to get early engagement gets more engagement simply because people are responding to the social proof signal. This is why videos with hundreds of thousands of views get recommended to you. Even if the content isn't actually high quality, the view count itself is a social proof signal that makes you more likely to watch. This is why posts with thousands of likes are shown to more people. The like count itself is a social proof signal. Throughout your day, social proof is automatically influencing your choices, often in ways that don't actually serve your interests. You might buy a product that everyone is buying, even though it's not actually the best product for your needs. You might hold beliefs that are popular in your social circle, even if those beliefs aren't actually true. You might avoid ideas and behaviors that are socially stigmatized, even if those ideas and behaviors might actually benefit you. Social proof even influences beliefs about factual matters. If you hear that most people believe X is true, you become more likely to believe X is true, even if you have no actual evidence for X. Your brain is automatically updating your belief based on the social proof signal. This mechanism is so powerful that it can even make you distrust your own perceptions. In the classic Asch conformity experiments, participants were shown lines of different lengths and asked to judge which line was longest. The correct answer was obvious. But when the participant was put in a group where everyone else, who were actually Confederates, gave an obviously wrong answer, the participant went along with the group about 35 of the time. They saw with their own eyes that everyone else was giving a wrong answer, but they conformed anyway. This suggests that social proof overrides even direct sensory perception. Your brain values conformity so highly that it will literally doubt what it's seeing in order to match the group. And here's the real shock. People who are higher in intelligence and higher in education are actually more vulnerable to certain types of social proof, because they're better at generating sophisticated rationalizations for why the group must be right and their individual perception must be wrong. So throughout your day, pay attention to social proof. Notice how many of your choices are actually based on what you genuinely want and how many are based on what you perceive others want. Notice how many of your beliefs are based on actual evidence and how many are based on the perception that most people believe this. When you see a post on social media, notice the like count. Notice how it influences your perception of the post. Would you perceive it differently if it had 100 likes instead of 100,000? Probably. But why should it? The likes don't change the actual content, but they change your perception through the social proof mechanism. When you're in a group and the group consensus differs from your individual assessment, notice the pressure to conform. Notice how your brain is automatically generating reasons to doubt yourself and align with the group. In some situations, social conformity is appropriate. You should follow traffic laws even if you're alone on an empty road. But in situations where you have genuine expertise or genuine information that contradicts the group, notice how hard it is to maintain your individual assessment. Social proof is one of the most powerful forces shaping human behavior. Most of your choices, beliefs, and behaviors are influenced by it without your conscious awareness. The first step toward freedom is noticing how much of your life is determined by social proof rather than by your own genuine preferences and values. Thing 7. Authority submission. There's a remarkable study that has been replicated hundreds of times. A person in a white coat, a sign of medical authority, can ask people to do things that go against their moral intuitions, and most people will comply. The person claiming authority says, "This is for science," or "I'm responsible if anything goes wrong," and people obey even when they're being asked to administer what they believe are dangerous electrical shocks to another person. This is the power of authority. When your brain perceives authority, your submissive behavioral system activates automatically. You don't consciously decide to obey authority. Your brain does it for you. Authority can be marked in many ways: titles, doctor, professor, general, credentials, diplomas, certificates, appearance, uniforms, suits, formal dress, context, being on a stage, being seated behind a desk, confidence, and speaking style. When your brain detects one or more of these authority markers, your amygdala downregulates, threat level decreases, your submissive neural networks activate, and your behavior shifts toward compliance. This is actually adaptive in many contexts. In most human environments throughout history, authority figures had more information and power, so following authority was usually a good strategy. But in modern environments, authority can be faked, and people with authority can be wrong, but your brain still activates the submissive response. Throughout your day, you're automatically submitting to authority figures without conscious awareness. You accept medical advice from someone in a white coat. You accept legal advice from someone with a law degree. You accept parenting advice from someone who wrote a parenting book. You accept fitness advice from someone with a buff body. You accept financial advice from someone who claims to have made millions. And you're doing this automatically without actually evaluating whether the authority figure actually has reliable knowledge. This is why people with authority, doctors, lawyers, politicians, celebrities, can be remarkably influential even when they're speaking outside their domain of actual expertise. A celebrity can endorse a product and people will buy it, not because they've evaluated the product's quality, but because the celebrity is a recognizable authority figure. A politician can make claims about economics or science, and people will believe them, not because they've evaluated the evidence, but because the politician is an authority figure. Your brain is literally wired to believe authority figures more than non-authorities, even when both are saying the same thing. In studies where the exact same claim is attributed to either an expert or a non-expert, the expert's claim is judged as more credible, even though the claim itself hasn't changed. And it gets worse. When an authority figure makes a statement, your critical thinking faculties actually down-regulate. The prefrontal cortex involved in critical analysis shows less activation. The amygdala, threat detection, shows less activation. Your brain is essentially saying, this person is authority, so it must be safe, so I don't need to carefully analyze what they're saying. Throughout your day, notice where you're automatically submitting to authority. Notice which authority figures you're listening to without critical evaluation. Ask yourself, does this person actually have expertise in this domain? Is there evidence for what they're claiming? Or am I just accepting their claim because they have authority markers? In many cases, the answer will be uncomfortable. You're accepting claims without evidence because you're responding to authority markers. And people who understand authority know this. They understand that adding authority markers to their message makes it more influential, regardless of whether the authority markers are actually justified by expertise. This is why you see so many people on social media adding credentials to their names or titles to their bios, not because the credentials are necessarily relevant to what they're saying, but because authority markers make their messages more influential. The goal is not to distrust all authority. Authorities often do have genuine expertise that's worth listening to. The goal is to develop awareness of when you're responding to authority markers versus when you're responding to actual evidence and logic. Ask yourself, is this person claiming authority over something they actually have expertise in? Or are they using authority markers from one domain to influence me in an unrelated domain? A doctor's authority in medicine doesn't transfer to authority in politics. A billionaire's success in business doesn't transfer to authority in morality or psychology. A celebrity's fame doesn't transfer to authority in fitness or nutrition. Authority submission is one of the most powerful forces shaping human behavior. Most of your beliefs and choices are influenced by authority figures without your conscious awareness. The first step toward freedom is noticing when you're responding to authority and asking whether that authority is actually justified. Thing 8. Default option. Bias. In countries where the default is to be an organ donor, 99% of people are organ donors. In countries where the default is to opt in to being an organ donor, meaning people have to actively choose, only 10 are donors. The difference? The default option. Everything else is identical, same country, same people, same relative ease of changing the default. But the default option alone determines whether 99 or 10 of people are donors. This is the power of the default option bias. When faced with a choice, most people go with whatever the default option is, simply because it requires no cognitive effort to maintain the status quo, while changing the default requires active effort and decision-making. Throughout your day, you're constantly experiencing default option biases. Your email has a default signature. Your phone has default settings. Your browser has default search engines and default homepages. Your subscriptions have default renewal settings. Your workplace has default benefits that you'll receive unless you actively opt out. Your insurance has default coverage levels. Most people never change the defaults, not because they've actively chosen them as their preferred option, not because they've evaluated all the alternatives, simply because they're the default. And your brain has learned that the default is usually the safe option. If everyone else is using the default, it's probably fine to use it too. This is mediated by status quo bias, the tendency to prefer things to stay the same rather than change. Status quo bias is partially rooted in loss aversion. Changing from the default feels like losing something, and partially rooted in cognitive ease. The default requires no decision-making effort. So your brain automatically treats the default as the good enough option and resists actively choosing something different. But here's what makes it really problematic. Companies and institutions understand default bias, and they deliberately set defaults in ways that serve their interests, not your interests. Tech companies set privacy settings to the least private default, knowing that most people won't change them. Insurance companies set coverage levels to defaults that are profitable for the company, not optimal for the customer. Subscription services set defaults to auto-renew, knowing that most people won't bother canceling. Throughout your day, you're probably not getting your preferred options. You're getting the defaults that were chosen by someone else, in service of their goals, not your goals. Here's another example. Netflix's default recommendation algorithm suggests what it thinks you'll watch, not what you actually want to watch. Most people click on the recommendation rather than browsing for something they specifically want. They end up watching what the default algorithm suggested, not what they would have chosen if they'd thought about it. Your default news feed shows you what the algorithm thinks will keep you engaged, not what will actually inform you accurately. Your default social media recommendations prioritize engagement, not accuracy or relevance to your actual interests. And on a larger scale, your default beliefs are often the beliefs you absorbed from your family and community growing up. These are the default beliefs that required no active choosing. Unless you've actively chosen to change them, you're probably still running the defaults you were given. And you might not have questioned whether these defaults actually serve your interests or values. So throughout your day, notice the defaults. Notice the email signature, the browser settings, the subscription renewals, the insurance coverage, the investment defaults, the benefits selections. Ask yourself, is this actually what I want, or am I just accepting the default because it requires no effort to maintain it? And more importantly, notice the meta defaults, the default beliefs, values, and behavioral patterns you absorbed growing up. These are running your life in ways you might not be aware of. You have a default career path, probably similar to your parents. You have default relationship patterns, probably similar to your parents. You have default financial habits, probably similar to your parents. You have default political beliefs, probably similar to your parents. You have default values, probably similar to your community's values. None of these defaults were consciously chosen by you. They were simply inherited. And unless you've actively questioned them and deliberately chosen to change them, you're still running them. The first step toward genuine choice is noticing the defaults, and then deliberately deciding which defaults you want to keep and which you want to change. Because the defaults are powerful, they're sticky, and they feel natural, and they require effort to change. But they're not inevitable, and they're not necessarily serving your interests. Pay attention to defaults today. Really notice them, because the more you notice them, the more power you have to actually choose your own preferences rather than simply accepting the defaults. Thing 9. Groupthink susceptibility. When you're part of a group, something remarkable happens to your brain. Your individual reasoning faculties partially shut down. Your critical thinking reduces. Your openness to contradictory information decreases. You become more likely to conform to the group's belief, even if the group's belief contradicts your individual assessment. This is called groupthink, and it's happening whenever you're embedded in a group identity. Groupthink is mediated by several neural systems working together. Your threat detection system, disagreeing with the group feels threatening. Your reward system, conforming to the group feels rewarding. Your social monitoring system, you're constantly monitoring what the group thinks. And your sense-making system, you generate rationalizations for why the group must be right. In the workplace, groupthink leads to poor decision-making. Groups converge on poor strategies because dissent is punished and conformity is rewarded. Critical analysis stops. The group becomes convinced that their bad idea is a good idea, simply because everyone agrees with it. In politics, groupthink leads to polarization. Political groups become increasingly convinced of their moral rightness and their opponents' moral wrongness, not because of evidence, but because of groupthink. The group reinforces its own beliefs. Dissent from group orthodoxy is punished. External evidence contradicting the group's beliefs is dismissed as biased or manipulated. In friend groups, groupthink leads to behaviors that the individual members might not endorse. A group of friends collectively develops a joke or mockery target, and the group relentlessly pursues the mockery. An individual member might find the mockery unkind, but the group consensus overrides individual conscience. Or a group develops a norm of heavy drinking or drug use, and members conform because the group norm is powerful. In families, groupthink leads to repeated patterns of dysfunction. A family develops a narrative about one member: he's the lazy one, she's the ambitious one, he's the troubled one, and the family groupthink reinforces this narrative. The individual is essentially locked into the family's shared belief about them. Attempts to change the narrative are resisted because the family has invested in the existing narrative. Throughout your day, you're susceptible to groupthink in multiple groups that you belong to. Your workplace group has its own groupthink. Your friend group has its own groupthink. Your family has its own groupthink. Your political ideological group has its own groupthink. Your religious group, if you have one, has its own groupthink. And here's the thing that makes it insidious. Groupthink doesn't feel like groupthink from the inside. It feels like you're thinking clearly. It feels like you're part of a group of intelligent people who understand things correctly. The group consensus feels like truth because the whole group is confirming it. But when you step outside the group, you start to see the groupthink. You meet someone from a different group who has completely different beliefs with the same conviction that they're right. This can be disorienting because both groups can't be right, but both groups feel equally convinced of their rightness from the inside. This is why people who leave cults often report that they didn't realize they were in a cult until they left. While embedded in the groupthink felt completely normal and correct. From outside, they could suddenly see all the ways the group was distorting reality and punishing dissent. So how does groupthink actually work neurologically? The process starts with social proof you perceive that the group believes something. Your mirror neuron system activates. You start to believe it too, even before you consciously realize you're changing your belief. Then, conformity reinforcement kicks in when you express the group's belief. The group rewards you with approval, agreement, and social inclusion. When you express doubt, the group punishes you with social disapproval or exclusion. This reward and punishment system powerfully shapes your expressed beliefs and your actual beliefs. Then comes motivated reasoning. You start generating rationalizations for why the group belief must be true. If contradictory evidence emerges, you don't evaluate it objectively. You evaluate it through the lens of the group narrative. Evidence that supports the group belief is accepted uncritically. Evidence that contradicts the group belief is scrutinized severely and usually dismissed. Finally comes the illusion of unanimity. You come to believe that everyone in the group agrees with the group narrative. In reality, many people probably have doubts. But because disagreement is punished, people keep their doubts private. You observe conformity, and you misinterpret this conformity as genuine agreement. This reinforces the groupthink. Throughout your day, notice the groups you're embedded in. Notice how their beliefs and values shape your beliefs and values. Ask yourself, Which of my beliefs are authentically mine versus beliefs I've adopted because of group conformity pressure? Which of my values are authentically mine versus values I've absorbed from my group? This is uncomfortable because the answer is usually more of your beliefs and values are group influenced than you'd like to admit. But noticing this is the first step toward genuine autonomy. You can't choose your actual beliefs until you recognize which of your beliefs are actually just group conformity. The goal is not to reject all group beliefs and become a complete individualist. Humans are social creatures, and groups provide real benefits. The goal is to become aware of which beliefs you hold because you've evaluated evidence versus which beliefs you hold because your group holds them. And then you can make conscious choices about which group beliefs you endorse and which you want to change. Pay attention to groupthink today. Notice where you're conforming because of group pressure versus where you're making independent choices. The more aware you become, the more genuine agency you have. Thing 10. Ingrained heuristics. Your brain is constantly taking shortcuts. It can't possibly analyze every piece of information with complete rationality, so it uses heuristics, mental shortcuts that usually work well, but sometimes fail. These heuristics are so deeply ingrained in your brain through millions of years of evolution and through your lifetime of learning that you use them automatically, without conscious awareness. One of the most fundamental heuristics is the availability heuristic, judging how common something is based on how easily examples come to mind. If you can easily think of examples of plane crashes, you overestimate how common plane crashes are. If you can easily think of examples of heart attacks, you overestimate how common heart attacks are. Your brain is using ease of recall as a proxy for frequency. This heuristic usually works well. Things that are actually common are usually easier to recall, but fails when things are common in your memory, not because they actually occur frequently, but because they're memorable for other reasons: media coverage, recency, emotional intensity. Another is the representativeness heuristic, judging how likely something is based on how representative it is of a category. If someone acts in ways that match your stereotype of a lawyer, conservative, logical, competitive, you judge them as more likely to be a lawyer. But this heuristic can completely mislead you. Someone who acts like a lawyer stereotype might not actually be a lawyer. The representativeness heuristic is causing you to judge probability based on category matching rather than on actual base rates. Another is the anchoring heuristic, using the first number you encounter as a reference point for all subsequent numerical estimates. If someone asks you whether Gandhi lived past 65 and then asks you to estimate his age at death, your estimate will be influenced by the 65 anchor. If someone first mentions a salary of $100,000 in a negotiation, all subsequent salary estimates will be anchored to that number. Your brain is using the first available number as a reference point. Another is the effect heuristic, judging the probability or value of something based on your emotional reaction to it rather than on objective evidence. If you're afraid of flying, you overestimate how dangerous flying is. If you're excited about a technology, you overestimate its benefits and underestimate its risks. Your emotional reaction is being used as a proxy for objective evaluation. Another is the sunk cost heuristic, continuing to invest in something because of past investment, even though the past investment should be irrelevant to future decisions. You finish a terrible movie because you paid for it. You stay in a bad relationship because you've already invested years. You continue a failing business because you've already invested money. Rationally, only future consequences should matter. Sunk costs are sunk. But your brain uses the heuristic of, I've already invested, so I should continue. Throughout your day, you're automatically using these heuristics to make rapid decisions. This is actually valuable without heuristics. You'd be paralyzed trying to consciously analyze every decision. But the problem is that these heuristics are so automatic, so ingrained, that you believe your heuristic-based judgments are objective truth rather than shortcut-based approximations. You judge someone's intelligence based on how easily you can think of evidence of their intelligence, availability heuristic. You judge someone's profession based on how well they match your stereotype, representativeness heuristic. You estimate risk based on your emotional reaction, affect heuristic. And you have no idea that you're using these shortcuts. You believe you're judging objectively, but you're not. You're using deeply ingrained neural shortcuts that usually work but sometimes fail spectacularly. The first step is awareness. When you make a judgment, pause and ask yourself, what heuristic might I be using? Am I judging frequency based on ease of recall, availability heuristic? Am I judging probability based on category matching, representativeness heuristic? Am I using an emotional reaction as proxy for objective evaluation, affect heuristic? Am I being influenced by an anchor that was presented to me? Once you're aware of which heuristic you might be using, you can reality test it. You can ask, is this judgment based on actual evidence, or is it based on a heuristic that might be misleading me? For example, if you're overestimating how common plane crashes are because you can easily recall news stories about crashes, you can reality test by looking up actual statistics. When you see that plane travel is actually much safer than driving, you can recalibrate your judgment. You can consciously override the availability heuristic with actual data. Throughout your day, pay attention to the judgments you're making. Notice where you might be using ingrained heuristics. Ask yourself whether your judgments are based on actual evidence or on mental shortcuts. The more aware you become of your own heuristics, the more you can choose whether to follow them or to reality test them. Thing 11. Reactance response. When someone tells you that you can't do something or that you're not allowed to do something, something happens in your brain. Your amygdala detects a threat to your autonomy. Your threat system activates. You experience a motivation to do exactly the thing you were told not to do. This is called psychological reactance, and it happens automatically beneath your conscious awareness. Parents understand this phenomenon even if they don't know the neuroscience. If you tell a child, you can't have this toy, the child wants it more. The prohibition itself has made the toy more desirable. The child wasn't consciously thinking, I want to assert my autonomy. The child's automatic reactance system was activated. Throughout your day, you're experiencing reactance responses. When a company says, for a limited time only, your reactance system is activated. Scarcity is being used to trigger the feeling that your options are being limited, and this triggers a reactance response. When someone is trying to persuade you by saying, most people believe this, your reactance system might be activated. You perceive an attempt to limit your autonomy by conforming you to the group, and you react against it. The neurological basis of reactance is in your anterior cingulate cortex and insula regions involved in detecting threats to autonomy and detecting when you're being constrained. When these regions detect that your freedom is being limited, they activate a motivation to reassert your freedom. This motivation is automatic. You don't consciously reason, my autonomy is being threatened, so I should do the opposite of what's being requested. You just feel the motivation to do the opposite. This is why heavy-handed persuasion often backfires. If someone uses transparent manipulation tactics to try to convince you to do something, your reactance system is activated. You become motivated to do the opposite, even if the thing being requested is actually in your interest. The transparency of the persuasion attempt triggers reactance. This is also why restrictions often increase the attractiveness of restricted things. When alcohol is prohibited, it becomes more attractive to people who want to assert their autonomy. When certain websites are blocked, they become more attractive because the blocking itself is seen as a threat to autonomy. When certain books are banned, they become more desirable. Throughout your day, notice when your reactance system is being activated. Notice when you're motivated to do something because someone told you not to do it, or because you perceive your autonomy as being restricted. Ask yourself, am I actually motivated to do this thing because it's in my interest? Or am I motivated simply because my autonomy is being threatened? Often, the answer will be uncomfortable. You're being motivated by reactance rather than by genuine preference. You want to do something not because it's good for you, but because you're reacting against perceived autonomy restriction. This is why the most effective persuasion doesn't feel like persuasion. It doesn't feel like your autonomy is being restricted. It doesn't use heavy manipulation tactics that trigger reactance. Instead, it gently expands your sense of options while making one option seem particularly attractive. You don't feel manipulated. You feel like you're freely choosing, and so your reactance system isn't activated. Thing 12. Negativity overweighting. Your brain is designed to detect threats. In ancestral environments, missing a threat was far more costly than missing an opportunity. An ancestor who missed seeing a predator was eaten. An ancestor who failed to notice a spoiled food source got sick. An ancestor who didn't notice a rival became deceased. But an ancestor who saw a threat that wasn't there, well, they were just overly cautious. Evolution selected for threat sensitivity. So your amygdala, threat detection center, processes negative information faster and more deeply than positive information. You can receive 99 compliments and 1 criticism, and the criticism will occupy your thoughts more. You can have a day with 23 positive events and 1 negative event, and your overall assessment of the day will be colored by the negative event. This is the negativity bias, and it's built into your neurology. Throughout your day, this bias is shaping your perception of reality. You notice what's wrong more than what's right. You notice failures more than successes. You notice threats more than opportunities. And because you're noticing threats more, your brain is constantly in a slight state of threat activation. Your amygdala is primed. Your cortisol levels might be elevated. Your parasympathetic nervous system, rest and digest, is less active than your sympathetic nervous system, fight or flight. This is why bad news gets more attention than good news. This is why criticism sticks in your mind more than praise. This is why 1 negative review of a product feels more significant than 10 positive reviews. This is why 1 argument in a relationship feels more significant than weeks of harmony. The negativity bias is also why news outlets can capture your attention by focusing on threats, conflicts, and bad news. Good news doesn't activate your amygdala as strongly, so it doesn't grab your attention. But a story about a rare but terrifying threat will absolutely grab your attention. Your brain will focus on it. Your amygdala will fire. And you'll become increasingly convinced that the world is more dangerous than it actually is. This is why social media is often so emotionally negative. Social media algorithms have learned that negative content gets more engagement than positive content. Outrage gets more engagement than joy. Conflict gets more engagement than harmony. So the algorithms promote negative content. Your feed fills with reasons to be angry, afraid, or disgusted. And your brain is constantly being primed for threat detection by the endless stream of negative content. Throughout your day, pay attention to the negativity bias. Notice which events you're focusing on. Notice whether you're overweighting the negative and underweighting the positive. Notice whether your sense of your day, your relationships, your circumstances is being colored by the negativity bias. 1 practical defense is to deliberately seek positive information. If you spend your morning scrolling a social media feed full of bad news, you've primed your brain for threat detection before your day has even started. But if you start your day by deliberately noticing something positive, something to be grateful for, something that went well, you activate your reward system instead of your threat system. Your parasympathetic nervous system activates. Your cortisol levels are lower. You experience the day from a different neurological starting point. Thing 13. Narrative framing. Your brain is a story-making machine. It doesn't just perceive raw facts. It constantly constructs narratives, stories that tie facts together into a coherent meaning. And the narrative you construct determines how you feel about the facts and what action you take in response. Consider two ways of framing the same situation. A medical procedure can be described as having a 90 survival rate or as having a 10 mortality rate. These are mathematically identical. But the 90 frame activates your approach system, focus on positive outcome. The 10 frame activates your avoidance system, focus on negative outcome. Your emotional response to the procedure is different depending on the frame, even though the actual facts haven't changed. A job offer can be framed as starting salary $80,000, activating focus on what you're getting, or as delayed path to $120,000, activating focus on what you're missing. Or it can be framed as $15,000 less than the competitor's offer, activating comparison and loss focus. The same job is perceived completely differently depending on the narrative frame. A relationship can be framed as a person I love, activating positive associations, or as someone who has hurt me, activating negative associations. Both frames might be accurate, but they activate completely different emotional systems. Throughout your day, you're experiencing narratives. News is presented with a particular frame. You receive an event, and immediately your brain constructs a narrative about what it means. Someone says something, and you construct a narrative about their intention. You experience something happening, and you construct a narrative about why it happened. And here's the thing. The narrative you construct determines your emotional response and your behavioral response. The same event can lead to hope or despair, motivation or resignation, compassion or anger, depending on the narrative frame. This is why political communication is so focused on framing. Different parties will describe the same policy with completely different frames. One party frames immigration restriction as protecting the border and national security, activating security and protection narratives. Another party frames it as discrimination and violation of human rights, activating justice and compassion narratives. The same policy, completely different narratives, completely different emotional responses. Throughout your day, pay attention to the narratives you're constructing. Notice the frame you're applying to situations. Ask yourself, is this the only possible frame? What would the situation look like with a different frame? How would I feel differently? How would I respond differently? The first step toward greater agency is recognizing that the narrative is not the reality. The narrative is a story your brain has constructed. Other narratives are possible. And by consciously choosing which narrative frame to apply, you can influence your emotional response and your behavior. Thing 14. Projection mechanism. When you judge other people, you're not actually judging them objectively. You're projecting your own mental states, fears, motivations, and values onto them. Then, you're judging your projection as if it were objective assessment of who they are. This is called the projection mechanism, and it happens automatically through your theory of mind systems, brain regions that let you think about what others are thinking. Your brain creates a mental model of other people, and this model is heavily influenced by your own mental state. If you're anxious, you're more likely to perceive others as anxious or threatening. If you're in a good mood, you're more likely to perceive others as friendly and cooperative. If you're feeling inadequate, you're more likely to perceive others as competent and superior. If you're feeling confident, you're more likely to perceive others as less capable than you actually are. The psychoanalytic concept of projection goes even deeper. You project your own unacknowledged characteristics onto others. If you have aggressive impulses that you don't accept in yourself, you might perceive others as aggressive. If you have sexual desires that you don't accept, you might perceive others as overly sexual. If you have dishonest impulses that you don't accept, you might perceive others as dishonest. Throughout your day, you're projecting. When you interpret someone's ambiguous behavior, you're filling in the ambiguity with your own expectations and fears. When you assume you know what someone is thinking, you're projecting your own thought processes onto them. When you judge someone's character, you're partially judging your own mental model of them rather than their actual character. This is why people often see what they want to see in others. A person hoping someone is trustworthy will interpret ambiguous behavior as evidence of trustworthiness. A person suspecting someone is dishonest will interpret ambiguous behavior as evidence of dishonesty. The same behavior, interpreted completely differently depending on what was projected onto it. Throughout your day, notice when you're projecting. Notice when you're assuming you know what someone is thinking or why they did something. Notice when you're interpreting ambiguous behavior. Ask yourself, am I responding to what this person actually did? Or am I responding to what I projected onto them? This is especially important in relationships and conflicts. In an argument, you're probably interpreting the other person's actions through a filter of projection. You might assume they intended to hurt you when they might have been responding from their own fear or pain. You might assume they don't care about you when they might actually be struggling to express care. The first step toward reducing the damage from projection is recognizing that you're doing it. You can't eliminate projection, it's built into how brains work, but you can become aware of it. And once aware, you can actually ask the other person what they were thinking or why they did something, rather than just projecting your assumptions onto them. Thing 15. False attribution. Every day, you make attributions about why things happen. Someone is late to a meeting. Why? You might attribute it to them being disrespectful or disorganized. You're late to a meeting. Why? You might attribute it to unexpected traffic or an earlier meeting running over. The same behavior, being late, is attributed to completely different causes depending on whose behavior it is. This is the fundamental attribution error, also called correspondence bias. And it's one of the most pervasive biases in human thinking. When others behave in certain ways, you attribute it to their internal characteristics, personality, ability, intentions. When you behave in certain ways, you attribute it to external circumstances, the situation you're in, factors outside your control. The neuroscience behind this error involves different activation patterns depending on whether you're thinking about yourself or others. When you think about yourself, your DMPFC, involved in self-reflection, is highly active and has direct access to your internal experience, your intentions, the circumstances you were facing, the constraints you were operating under. When you think about others, your TPJ, temporoparietal junction, involved in theory of mind, is active, but you have much less direct access to their internal experience. You're inferring it from their behavior. And you tend to infer internal characteristics more readily than you infer situational constraints. Throughout your day, you're making false attributions. A colleague seems disengaged in a meeting. You attribute it to them not caring about their job. You don't know that they received bad news before the meeting. You don't know that they're dealing with a health crisis. You don't know that the meeting is scheduled at a time when they're cognitively depleted. You're making an attribution based on limited information, and your attribution is biased toward internal characteristics. A friend doesn't respond to your message quickly. You might attribute it to them not valuing your friendship. You don't know that they're overwhelmed with work. You don't know that they're dealing with a family crisis. You don't know that they struggle with phone anxiety. You're making an attribution based on limited information. A person in traffic cuts you off. You attribute it to them being a reckless driver. You don't know that they're rushing to a hospital. You don't know that they didn't see you. You don't know that their attention was drawn away by an urgent phone call. You're making an attribution based on limited information. This bias gets even worse in relationships and conflicts. In a close relationship, you have accumulated false attributions. Your partner did something hurtful. You attributed it to them not caring about your feelings. But your partner might have been responding from their own fear or pain. They might have been completely focused on their own distress and didn't even consider how it would affect you. But the false attribution has stuck in your mind. You've built a narrative around their uncaring nature, based on a false attribution of their motivation. Throughout your day, notice when you're making attributions. Notice when you're attributing others' behavior to internal characteristics without considering situational factors. Ask yourself, what situational factors might explain this behavior? What circumstances might this person be facing that I'm not aware of? The first step toward reducing the damage from false attributions is curiosity. Instead of assuming you know why someone did something, actually ask them. Instead of assuming you know what they were thinking or how they were feeling, actually ask them. And you might be surprised at how often your false attribution was completely wrong. Thing 16. Anchoring perception. Before you consciously register what you're seeing, your perception has already been anchored to a reference point. That reference point determines how you interpret everything that follows. This is the anchoring effect, and it happens automatically in perception, judgment, and decision-making. Imagine you're looking at 2 glasses of water. Both are room temperature. But you dip your left hand in hot water and your right hand in cold water for a minute. Then you put both hands in the room temperature water. Your left hand perceives the room temperature water as cold. Your right hand perceives the room temperature water as hot. The same stimulus is perceived completely differently depending on what anchored your perception. This is true for all perception. The contrast to what came before determines how you perceive what comes now. A person who looks only moderately attractive will seem very attractive after you've been looking at unattractive people. The same person will seem less attractive after you've been looking at very attractive people. The person hasn't changed. Your anchoring perception has changed based on the contrast. In judgment and decision-making, anchoring is even more powerful. The first number you encounter becomes your mental reference point. In a salary negotiation, if the first number mentioned is 100,000, your counteroffer will be anchored to that number. If you propose 50,000 as your first number, the other person's counteroffer will be anchored to that number. Whoever proposes the first number has a huge advantage, not because their number is necessarily justified, but because it anchors all subsequent thinking. This is why real estate agents show you terrible properties first. After seeing ugly, poorly maintained properties, a moderately nice property seems amazing. Your perception is anchored to the bad properties you saw first. This is why companies list original prices before showing you the sale price. Your perception is anchored to the original price. Even though you weren't willing to pay the original price, the anchoring makes the sale price seem like much better value. Throughout your day, your perceptions are being anchored by whatever you encounter first. The mood you're in when you see your partner determines how you perceive their behavior. The price you see first in a shopping context determines how you judge other prices. The person you talk to first in a group determines how you perceive other group members, by contrast or similarity. And the scary part is that you can be anchored by completely arbitrary information. In studies, people are told a random number has been generated by a computer and then asked to estimate a quantity. Their estimates are influenced by the random number, even though they consciously know the number is random and unrelated to the quantity. The anchoring happens at a pre-conscious level. Your rational mind knows the anchor is irrelevant, but your perception is still anchored. Throughout your day, notice what you're anchored to. Notice which reference points are shaping your perceptions and judgments. Ask yourself, would I perceive this differently if I had a different anchoring reference? If I had encountered something else first, would I judge this situation differently? The first step toward freedom from anchoring is recognizing that your perception is anchored, because then you can deliberately try to recalibrate by considering alternative anchoring points. You can ask, what would I perceive if I anchored to a different reference? Thing 17. Sunk cost. Decision-making you've been watching a movie for 90 minutes. It's terrible. You hate it. But you've already invested 90 minutes, so you watch the last 20 minutes too. Why? Because you're trapped by sunk cost thinking. You've been working at a job you hate for 7 years. You've invested 7 years of your life and established yourself in the position. So you stay for another year instead of making a change. Why? Because you're trapped by sunk cost thinking. You've been in a relationship for 5 years. The relationship isn't working anymore, but you've already invested 5 years and you've merged your lives together. So you stay for another year hoping things will improve. Why? Because you're trapped by sunk cost thinking. The sunk cost trap is simple. You continue investing time, money, or effort into something because of what you've already invested, even though the past investment is completely irrelevant to whether you should continue investing. Rationally, sunk costs should be irrelevant. You should only consider future consequences. Will watching the last 20 minutes of this terrible movie bring you joy? No, so you shouldn't watch them. The 90 minutes you've already invested doesn't change this analysis. Those 90 minutes are gone regardless. But emotionally and behaviorally, sunk costs heavily influence decisions. The neuroscience behind sunk cost thinking involves loss aversion. Your brain weights losses much more heavily than gains. When you contemplate stopping an activity, your brain frames this as a loss, losing the time you've invested. This loss is so emotionally heavy that it biases you toward continuing the activity, even if continuing is not in your best interest. Throughout your day, sunk cost thinking is influencing your decisions. You're trapped in commitments partly because of what you've already invested. You're continuing behaviors partly because you've already established them. You're holding on to beliefs partly because you've already publicly committed to them. Your past investment is locking you into a path that might not be your optimal path going forward. Relationships are particularly vulnerable to sunk cost thinking. People stay in bad relationships partly because they've already invested time and emotional energy. People stay married despite incompatibility, partly because of the shared history. The shared history and past investment are emotionally powerful, even though they're logically irrelevant to whether the relationship is good for them going forward. Careers are particularly vulnerable to sunk cost thinking. People stay in jobs that don't serve them, partly because they've already established themselves. People continue down career paths that don't make sense, partly because they've already invested in education or credentials. The past education and credentials are emotionally powerful, even though they're logically irrelevant to whether that career path will be satisfying going forward. Throughout your day, notice where sunk cost thinking is influencing you. Notice where you're continuing to invest because of what you've already invested. Ask yourself, if I hadn't already invested in this, would I start it now? If the answer is no, that's a sign that sunk cost thinking might be influencing you. The first step toward freedom from sunk cost thinking is conscious recognition. When you notice yourself in a sunk cost trap, you can ask, is my decision being driven by future consequences, what will happen if I continue, or past investments, what I've already invested? If it's being driven by past investments, that's a sign to reconsider. Your past investment doesn't change the value of future consequences. Thing. 18. Planning fallacy. When you estimate how long a task will take, you almost always underestimate. You estimate a project will take 2 weeks, it takes 4 weeks. You estimate you can prepare for a presentation in 2 hours, it takes 4 hours. You estimate you can pack for a trip in 30 minutes, it takes 90 minutes. This is the planning fallacy, and it's remarkably consistent. Even when people consciously know they have a tendency to underestimate, even when they deliberately try to add buffer time, they still underestimate. You can have a clear track record showing that your estimates are always low, and you'll still make the same underestimation on the next task. The planning fallacy has multiple contributing factors. First is optimism. Bias, you tend to see your plans in an unduly positive light. You focus on the best-case scenario where everything goes smoothly, and you downweight the possibility of obstacles and complications. Second is the planning fallacy itself. When you make plans, you focus on the details of the specific task. You don't adequately access your memory of how long similar tasks have taken in the past. Third, is cognitive load. Accurately estimating requires holding multiple pieces of information in mind simultaneously, which is cognitively taxing, so you tend to make quick estimates based on limited information. Throughout your day, the planning fallacy is shaping your schedule and creating stress. You commit to deadlines based on underestimated task duration. When the deadline arrives and you haven't finished the task, you're stressed. You miss commitments to other people because you underestimated how long your current task would take. You create cascading delays and conflicts. In project management, the planning fallacy has been so well documented that many project managers use a reference class forecasting approach. They estimate based on how long similar projects actually took in the past, rather than trying to estimate from first principles. This approach is significantly more accurate than the intuitive planning approach. Throughout your day, notice where the planning fallacy is influencing you. Notice where you're committing to deadlines based on underestimated task duration. Ask yourself, how long have similar tasks actually taken in the past? Have I added an adequate buffer time for obstacles and complications? The first step toward combating the planning fallacy is consciously accessing your memory of past tasks. Instead of estimating from first principles, ask yourself, how long did it actually take last time I did something similar? Then add buffer time for complications and obstacles. Thing 19. Confirmation bias. Once you believe something, your brain creates a filter. Information that confirms your belief passes through the filter easily. Information that contradicts your belief gets scrutinized severely and usually rejected. This is confirmation bias, and it's one of the most powerful forces keeping people locked into their existing beliefs. You believe you're a morning person. You notice the times you wake up early. You conveniently forget the times you sleep in. Your brain has highlighted the confirming evidence and minimized the disconfirming evidence, so your belief is reinforced. You believe your political party is right and the opposing party is wrong. You notice all the examples of your party being right. You notice all the examples of the opposing party being wrong. You don't notice, or you interpret differently, the examples of your party being wrong. Your brain is selectively processing information in a way that confirms your pre-existing belief. You believe someone is dishonest. You notice the times they said something misleading. You interpret their honest statements in a way that seems deceptive. You ignore evidence of their honesty. Your brain is processing information in a way that confirms your pre-existing belief about them. The confirmation bias is mediated by motivated reasoning. Your brain is motivated to reach a particular conclusion, and it processes information in a way that leads to that conclusion. Your conscious mind believes it's thinking objectively, but it's actually engaging in motivated reasoning. This is why smart people sometimes believe things that are demonstrably false. Intelligence doesn't make you less subject to confirmation bias. In fact, intelligence can make confirmation bias worse, because intelligent people are better at generating sophisticated rationalizations for why they should believe their pre-existing belief. Throughout your day, confirmation bias is keeping you locked into your existing beliefs. You're not objectively evaluating information. You're selectively processing information in a way that confirms what you already believe. And because you're doing this unconsciously, you believe you're being objective. The first step toward escaping confirmation bias is active curiosity about disconfirming evidence. Instead of avoiding evidence that contradicts your belief, deliberately seek it out. Ask yourself, what would change my mind about this? What evidence would I need to see to believe differently? Then actively look for that evidence. This is uncomfortable because confirmation bias feels normal. It feels like you're being objective. But once you start deliberately seeking disconfirming evidence, you'll realize how selective your normal information processing is. Thing 20. Recency and contrast effects. Your judgment of a situation is disproportionately influenced by what happened most recently. A performance review for the entire year is disproportionately influenced by your performance in recent weeks. A job interview is disproportionately influenced by how the final minutes went. A relationship is disproportionately influenced by recent interactions rather than the overall relationship history. This is the recency effect, and it means your memory is not a faithful record of events. Your memory is weighted toward recent events. When you make judgments about something, you rely more on recent information because it's more cognitively available. Combined with the contrast effect, where perception is influenced by contrast to what came immediately before, this creates a powerful force shaping your judgments. The same event can be perceived completely differently depending on what came immediately before. A job candidate who had a weak first interview but a strong final interview might be remembered as a strong candidate, even if their overall performance was weak. A Netflix series that has weak episodes followed by strong final episodes might be remembered as a strong series. A relationship that has been rocky but recently improved might feel hopeful, even if the overall trajectory is negative. Throughout your day, recency bias is influencing your judgments and memories. Your current mood is influencing how you remember your day. Your most recent interaction with someone is influencing how you perceive them overall. Your most recent performance at a task is influencing how you judge your overall competence. The first step is awareness. When making a judgment, ask yourself, am I basing this on overall evidence, or am I basing this on recent events? Would I judge this differently if I considered the full history rather than just the recent events? Thing 21. Scarcity response. Scarcity automatically triggers a motivation to acquire the scarce resource. If something is available in unlimited quantities, you feel little motivation. But if it's limited, only 3 left in stock, your motivation automatically increases. This is the scarcity principle, and it happens beneath your conscious awareness. Scarcity triggers your ancient survival systems. In ancestral environments, scarcity of resources, food, water, mates, safe shelter, was genuinely threatening. Resources that were scarce were genuinely valuable and worth acquiring. So your brain evolved to automatically assign higher value to scarce resources. This heuristic usually works well. Scarce resources often are valuable, but it can be exploited. Throughout your day, scarcity framing is triggering your motivation systems. Limited time offer. Only 5 seats left at this price. Exclusive access. These are scarcity frames designed to trigger your automatic response. And your conscious mind knows it's being manipulated, but your automatic systems respond anyway. Retailers deliberately create scarcity to increase perceived value and urgency. They limit inventory. They use flash sales. They create limited edition products. They use language that emphasizes scarcity. Your automatic systems respond by assigning higher value to the product, even though the scarcity might be entirely artificial. Dating apps use scarcity by showing you limited profiles per day. Your motivation to acquire access increases. You're willing to pay for premium access that gives you more profiles. The scarcity is entirely artificial. The app company has unlimited profiles, but your system responds as if it's real scarcity. Throughout your day, notice where scarcity is being used to manipulate your motivation. Notice where you're assigning higher value to something because it's presented as scarce. Ask yourself, is this actually scarce, or is the scarcity artificial? Would I want this as much if it were unlimited? The first step toward resistance is recognizing that scarcity is being used to trigger your automatic systems. Once aware, you can pause before responding to scarcity framing and ask yourself whether the scarcity is real or artificial. Thing 22. Emotional tagging. Every memory has an emotional tag. Your brain doesn't store memories as neutral information. It stores memories with an emotional valence, positive, negative, or neutral. This emotional tag profoundly influences how you retrieve and use that memory. If you have a memory of a person and that memory has a negative emotional tag, then whenever you encounter that person, the negative emotional association is automatically activated. The person themselves hasn't changed. The fact hasn't changed. But the emotional tag is causing you to respond negatively. Throughout your day, your emotional tags are influencing your behavior without your conscious awareness. A person you had a negative experience with gets an automatic negative emotional response. A place where you had a bad experience gets an automatic negative emotional response. A type of situation that reminds you of a stressful past experience gets an automatic stress response. This is why past trauma can so powerfully influence present behavior. A triggering situation activates the emotional tag from the past trauma. Your amygdala fires. Your threat system activates. You respond as if the past threat is present, even though you consciously know that the current situation is safe. This is also why love is so powerful. Memories of a loved one have strong, positive emotional tags. Even when that person frustrates you or disappoints you, the overall emotional tag is so positive that it colors your interpretation and response. Throughout your day, notice how emotional tags are influencing your behavior. Notice which people or situations automatically trigger emotional responses. Notice whether those emotional responses are based on the present situation or on emotional tags from past experiences. The first step is awareness. Once aware that you're responding to emotional tags, you can choose to reality test. You can ask, is this emotional response appropriate to the present situation? Or am I responding to emotional tags from past experiences? If it's the latter, you can work on updating the emotional tags by creating new positive experiences with the triggering person or situation. Thing 23. Empathy blindness. You understand other people's experiences through your own emotional and bodily experiences. When you see someone in pain, your mirror neurons activate. Your own pain centers activate. You experience resonance with their pain. This is empathy. But empathy is fundamentally limited. You can only understand others' experiences through your own experiences. This creates empathy blindness. You can't empathize with experiences very different from your own. If you've never been homeless, you have a hard time truly understanding homelessness. If you've never experienced severe depression, you have a hard time truly understanding it. If you've never experienced discrimination, you have a hard time truly understanding it. People often misinterpret this empathy blindness as lack of caring. If you cared, you would understand. But the limitation is neurological, not moral. Your empathy systems work through resonance with your own experience. Experiences sufficiently different from yours don't activate empathy as strongly. Throughout your day, empathy blindness is limiting your understanding of others. You judge people based on your own experience. You assume your experience is normal or universal. You assume that if something isn't a problem for you, it's not a real problem for others. Someone who has always had financial security might not understand the psychological stress of financial insecurity. Someone who has always been physically healthy might not understand chronic illness. Someone who has always been welcomed and accepted might not understand the psychological impact of discrimination. The first step is awareness of empathy blindness. Recognize that your experience is limited. Recognize that others' experiences might be sufficiently different from yours that you can't fully empathize through resonance alone. This awareness creates space for curiosity. Instead of assuming you understand, you can ask questions. You can listen to people's descriptions of their experiences. You can try to understand intellectually what you can't fully understand through emotional resonance. Thing 24. Social identity marking. You have a social identity, a sense of who you are in relation to groups you belong to. This identity is partly conscious, but largely operates beneath consciousness. Your brain automatically marks group membership and automatically adjusts behavior based on group context. When you're with your friend group, your behavior is calibrated to that group's norms. When you're with your family, your behavior shifts. When you're in a professional context, your behavior shifts again. When you're anonymous online, your behavior shifts in yet another direction. These aren't conscious decisions. Your brain automatically activates the social identity relevant to the context and adjusts behavior accordingly. Your social identity includes your gender identity, your racial ethnic identity, your national identity, your religious identity, if you have one, your political identity, your professional identity, your age cohort identity. All of these identities are part of your social being. Throughout your day, your social identity is automatically influencing your behavior, your perceptions, your feelings about yourself and others. When you're in a context where a particular identity is salient, for example, you're in a meeting where you're the only person of your demographic group, that identity becomes more prominent in your consciousness and more influential on your behavior. This is partly adaptive. Your social identity connects you to groups and communities and gives you a sense of belonging. But it also leads to in-group bias, out-group derogation, and reduced empathy for out-group members. Your behavior automatically shifts depending on whether you perceive someone as part of your group or outside your group. Throughout your day, notice which social identities are being activated. Notice how your behavior shifts depending on context. Notice how your empathy and judgment shift depending on in-group versus out-group membership. Notice how arbitrary social identities can be. You could have been born into a different group, and your entire perspective would be different. The first step is awareness. Once aware of how social identity is shaping you, you can consciously choose which identities you want to activate and which you want to minimize. You can consciously work to maintain empathy for out-group members. You can consciously recognize that people in out-groups are not fundamentally different from you. Thing 25. Routine dissociation. You perform a task so automatically that you become mentally absent. You drive home and don't remember the drive. You take a shower and don't remember the shower. You eat lunch and don't remember tasting the food. This is routine dissociation. Your body is executing a habitual routine while your conscious mind is completely checked out. Routine dissociation happens because habitual tasks are handled by the basal ganglia, ancient brain structure, rather than the prefrontal cortex, conscious, control center. Once a task is thoroughly habituated, conscious attention is no longer needed. In fact, conscious attention might interfere with smooth execution. A person who has played guitar for 20 years can play complex pieces while having a conversation. If they tried to consciously focus on each finger movement, they'd actually play worse. But routine dissociation has a cost. You lose the experience of your life. You spend hours per day on automatic behaviors, commuting, eating, household chores, and you're mentally absent for much of it. Your life is happening, but you're not fully present for it. Routine dissociation also makes you vulnerable to missing important information. You might be on automatic pilot and miss a critical email. You might be in automatic conversation mode and miss that someone is trying to tell you something important. Throughout your day, notice where you're dissociating. Notice where your body is executing a routine while your mind is elsewhere. You can reduce routine dissociation by deliberately bringing conscious attention to routine tasks. Try eating one meal per day with full conscious attention to the experience. Try one commute per week where you consciously notice your environment. Try one household task per week where you're fully present rather than mentally absent. The goal is not to eliminate routine dissociation that would be exhausting and would interfere with actual goal-directed thinking. The goal is to have some baseline conscious presence in your life, to actually experience at least some portion of your day rather than having it pass in automatic pilot. Meta patterns, system integration. You've now learned 25 everyday things you do without understanding why. The patterns range from basic automaticity, autopilot rituals, habit loops, to sophisticated biases, confirmation bias, planning fallacy, to complex social dynamics, groupthink, social identity, empathy blindness. But these 25 patterns are not isolated. They interact, they reinforce each other, they work together as a system. Understanding the system is the foundation for genuine insight. Your autopilot rituals run because the default mode network is in charge, but they're also sustained by habit loops, cue routine reward. Your habits are reinforced through social proof. Other people do the same thing, so it must be right. Your social proof is sustained through in-group bias and groupthink. Your groupthink is sustained by confirmation bias. You seek evidence that confirms the group's beliefs. Your confirmation bias is sustained by emotional tagging. The group's beliefs have positive emotional tags because the group is part of your positive social identity. So all 25 patterns are interconnected. They work together to create your current worldview, your current behaviors, your current relationships, your current life. And understanding these patterns as an integrated system is more powerful than understanding any single pattern in isolation. Here's the meta system. You have automatic behavioral patterns, autopilot micro-decisions, habit loops that run your daily life. These patterns are shaped by biases in perception, contextual priming, anchoring, recency effects that distort how you see the world. These biases are maintained by biases in belief formation, confirmation bias, motivated reasoning, false attribution that keep you locked into your current worldview. And the whole system is socially reinforced through conformity mechanisms, social proof, groupthink, in-group bias, authority submission, that make your views and behaviors feel normal and inevitable. Breaking out of this system requires working at multiple levels simultaneously. You need to develop awareness of your automatic behaviors. Notice when you're on autopilot. You need to reality test your perceptions. Notice when biases are distorting your perception. You need to examine your beliefs critically. Notice when confirmation bias is keeping you locked into false beliefs. And you need to consciously evaluate social influences. Notice when conformity pressure is pushing you in directions you don't actually want to go. This sounds overwhelming, and it is overwhelming if you try to do it all at once. But what's actually happening is that as you increase awareness in one area, it naturally propagates to other areas. If you start noticing your autopilot behaviors, you naturally start noticing how contextual priming influences those behaviors. If you start noticing confirmation bias, you naturally start questioning the beliefs it's maintaining. If you start noticing conformity pressure, you naturally start questioning the identities it's supporting. The journey from complete unconsciousness to full awareness is not a straight line. It's gradual. It's nonlinear. It involves moments of insight interspersed with long periods of going back to unconsciousness. This is normal. The goal is not to achieve perfect awareness. That's impossible. Your brain is too complex. The goal is to gradually increase awareness, gradually have more choices, gradually live more intentionally. Mastery tier. Lifelong practice. Understanding these 25 patterns is valuable, but understanding alone doesn't change behavior. You need to integrate this understanding into actual practice, into habits of awareness, into changed behaviors, into a different way of being in the world. Here's what lifelong practice looks like. Daily awareness practice. Every day, select one of the 25 patterns and notice it throughout your day. On Monday, notice autopilot behaviors. On Tuesday, notice habit loops. On Wednesday, notice contextual priming. By cycling through all 25 patterns repeatedly, you develop deep familiarity. You become expert at recognizing each pattern. You develop the neural pathways associated with noticing. Weekly reflection. Every week, reflect on your week through the lens of the 25 patterns. Where did unconscious patterns most powerfully shape your week? What insights did you gain? What would you do differently next week if you applied this awareness? Monthly challenges. Every month, select one pattern and deliberately work to change it. If you're working on reducing routine dissociation, commit to one meal per day eaten with full consciousness. If you're working on reducing confirmation bias, commit to deliberately seeking disconfirming evidence for your most cherished beliefs. If you're working on resisting groupthink, commit to expressing one dissenting opinion in your social groups. Quarterly assessment. Every 3 months, assess your progress. Notice how your daily life has changed. Notice how your relationships are different. Notice how your decisions are different. Notice what new patterns are emerging. Yearly integration. Every year, reflect on the full year. Notice the patterns that have shifted. Notice the patterns that persist. Notice which patterns are highest leverage for further work. Set intentions for the next year. This is lifelong practice. This is not a self-improvement project with an endpoint. This is developing a fundamental relationship with your own psychology. This is building the capacity to observe yourself with compassion and honesty. This is gradually upgrading your way of being. The goal is not perfection. The goal is not complete freedom from unconscious patterns. That's impossible. The goal is to have increasingly more choice, to be increasingly less controlled by automatic systems, to be increasingly more intentional, to be increasingly more yourself, where yourself means your conscious chosen values and preferences, not the default patterns that were installed in your brain before you had any say. Closing. The freedom of understanding. You woke up this morning and moved through your day. Every action, every decision, every thought and feeling seemed like it was happening because you chose it. You chose what time to wake up. You chose what to wear. You chose what to eat. You chose who to talk to. You chose what to believe. But after listening to this script, you understand something unsettling. Most of these choices weren't actually your conscious choices. They were outputs of automatic systems running beneath your consciousness. Your default mode network was running. Your habit loops were executing. Your perceptual biases were distorting reality. Your confirmation bias was keeping you locked into beliefs. Your social identity was shaping how you felt and acted. You weren't as free as you thought. You were operating in a more constrained way than you believed. This is the uncomfortable truth about human consciousness. We're not nearly as conscious or as in control as we believe ourselves to be. But here's the liberating part. Once you see this clearly, once you understand how the automatic systems actually work, you have a choice. You can't eliminate the automatic systems. They're fundamental features of brain architecture. But you can become aware of them, and awareness is the doorway to change. The person who doesn't understand habit loops is trapped by them. Every action is automatic. They're a slave to their habits. But the person who understands habit loops can notice when a habit loop is running. They can interrupt it. They can choose a different routine. They can change what was previously automatic. The person who doesn't understand confirmation bias is locked into their beliefs. They can't even see the evidence that would challenge them because their bias is filtering it out. But the person who understands confirmation bias can notice when they're selectively processing information. They can deliberately seek disconfirming evidence. They can update their beliefs based on actual evidence rather than on bias. The person who doesn't understand social influence is controlled by social pressure. They conform without realizing they're conforming. They adopt beliefs without realizing they're adopting them. They maintain behaviors without realizing why. But the person who understands social influence can notice when they're being influenced. They can evaluate whether the social pressure is actually aligned with their values. They can choose to conform or not based on conscious evaluation rather than automatic compliance. This is what understanding the 25 patterns does for you. It gives you choice where you previously had only automaticity. It gives you awareness where you previously had only blindness. It gives you freedom where you previously had only constraint. The journey is gradual. You won't wake up tomorrow with complete freedom from unconscious patterns. You'll probably find yourself automatically defaulting to old habits and old biases. This is normal. Change is slow. But what will change is your awareness. You'll catch yourself in unconscious patterns. You'll notice more. You'll choose more. You'll be more intentional. Every time you notice an autopilot behavior instead of executing it unconsciously, that's a small win. Every time you notice a bias distorting your perception instead of believing your distorted perception, that's a small win. Every time you notice social pressure and consciously evaluate whether you want to comply instead of automatically complying, that's a small win. These small wins accumulate. Over months and years, they compound. Your life gradually becomes more conscious, more chosen, more yours. And there's another benefit that comes from understanding these patterns. You understand other people with greater compassion. When someone is stuck in a pattern, trapped by a habit, controlled by a bias, you see that they're not choosing to be stuck. They're trapped by the same automatic systems that trap you. This understanding creates compassion. It reduces judgment. It opens up possibilities for genuine connection and understanding. The person who doesn't understand these patterns judges people for their automatic behaviors. They see someone checking their phone constantly and judge them as weak-willed or addicted. They see someone stuck in a bad relationship and judge them as foolish. They see someone trapped in a limiting belief and judge them as stupid. But the person who understands these patterns sees the underlying automatic systems. They see someone being controlled by a habit loop and understand it's not a character flaw. They see someone trapped by sunk cost thinking and understand it's a feature of human psychology. They see someone locked into a belief by confirmation bias and understand how hard it is to update beliefs once they're established. This understanding creates space for genuine compassion. And genuine compassion creates space for connection, influence, and change. So the gift of understanding these 25 everyday patterns is not just personal freedom. It's also the ability to meet other people with greater understanding and compassion. It's the ability to see through people's surface behaviors to the automatic systems driving them. It's the ability to be in relationship with others at a deeper level. And that changes everything. As you move forward from this moment, remember, you're not responsible for the automatic systems that run you. You didn't choose your default mode network. You didn't choose your evolutionary shaped biases. You didn't choose to be born into a particular social group with particular conditioning. But you are responsible for what you do with this understanding. You're responsible for noticing the patterns. You're responsible for questioning your automatic responses. You're responsible for gradually choosing more consciously. The journey from unconsciousness to consciousness is not a destination. It's a path you walk for your entire life. And every step of the path brings greater awareness, greater choice, greater freedom. Welcome to the path. Welcome to consciousness. Welcome to understanding why you do what you do every single day. And welcome to the freedom that comes from that understanding.